Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Hi, Maricella. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm doing really good. As some of our listeners probably know, I have some little ones at home, and one is deep into baseball season. So I am a hashtag baseball mom these days and spending way too much time on the ball field, but it's fun. It's fun. I'm outside. I'm connecting with, people that I don't typically get the time to connect with, other parents, and cheering on the kids. And it just feels so, I don't know, simplistic to just, I don't know, sports and kids and not my phone or technology or computer or TV or Netflix or any of those things, just to be outside. And
I get what you're saying. I would change the word simplistic. I would change it more to something, I don't know, it sounds like you're being more connected with the people around you and more mindful instead of being distracted by all the random amount of stuff that just comes at us today.
Yeah, more present.
Right.
And it's nice. I miss it. I miss being present in that way and just having fun.
It's very easy to just get sucked in to everything and everything that we're doing and going on. We're always trying to move really fast. A couple of weeks ago at the Rising Leaders Roundtables, we talked about preventing burnout, and that's a lot of it was like we don't even take time to take 10 deep breaths. Like the guest expert, Sarah Weilat, she made us take 5 minutes in which we took 10 deep breaths and then did a little dance break. Obviously without our cameras on. We did not do a public rendition of our dancing. I did, however, do a private rendition of dancing with myself, which was a lot of fun. And just that 5-minute break helps make you be more connected with the rest of things going on.
I know, it's pretty amazing. And I'm sure this would not surprise you, Maricella, but I am one of the vocal parents on the sidelines. Not in a negative way. I'm never negative. Always just cheering the kids on and screaming and being positive. And so I think that's my own version of maybe dancing by myself, is just really leaning into it and having fun and
right. And that's what it's about, right? Not taking yourself too seriously, being part of the whole thing, letting go a little bit. And I wouldn't expect anything less from
you. Of course. But it's important for me to talk about just this experience with my kids and at Ellevate. We're all at different stages in terms of caregiving. Some of us are caregivers for children or for elderly or for siblings. Some of us are not caregivers, and we want to normalize that. Like, we really want to normalize that we all show up in different ways and in the workforce and in the world, and those identities span, who we are at all times. And I know that the Marshall Plan for Moms, which was founded by Reshma Sujani, just came out with a study around childcare benefits and how they're key to attracting, retaining, and advancing women at work. We've talked in the past about some companies like Patagonia, who's a fellow B Corp, and they had on-site childcare and really big proponents around providing accessible benefits. We've had AUW on the podcast a few times talking about how we best support caregivers in the workplace, and what are some of the steps we can take towards that. So ongoing conversation here around why this is important, the ways that we can show up as employers in supporting caregivers.
Yeah, I mean, the study is pretty interesting. A lot of things I would say I'm not surprised. Um, like, it makes sense that it would be better to have childcare or support for caregivers. The study said 83% of people said that childcare benefits would be an important factor in deciding whether they stay at their current employer or look to switch employers. And I mean, I think we are moving towards a world where benefits matter more and more and more and more. And I love that the Marshall Plan for Moms did this study. I love that it's putting the conversation out there. I think that through the pandemic, there was a lot. We know that around 1 million women are still out of the workforce. And I was also reading, though, on the fact that there aren't that many studies about single childless women, and how that affects their career. I was reading one on the Washington Post. It's true, in the history of research, that hasn't been looked at nearly enough. And I would love to see like the comparisons of how that matches. Because I'll tell you, I'm a single childless woman, but I would still care for a company, like, about a company's childcare benefits, even if it's not directly impacting me.
Yeah, I agree. Rachel Scalara, who had also been a guest on the podcast, she and I talked about this a bit. She's a single parent caregiver, but more broadly, what you're saying here, Maricella, is and I think it's important to note is, childcare benefits, yes, important. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that we as a workforce should have access to. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about, professional support, childcare. I mean, it runs the gamut. And
support during menopause.
I'm sorry, what?
I said support during menopause. That's a big one lately.
Yes, it is. It is a big one. And we know in the U.S., it feels like we're fighting this fight on multiple fronts. We still don't have paid leave. So, that's the first form of caregiving right there, or primary one if we're talking about a caregiver of a child. And then it's about the whole journey of being a caregiver. What are the mechanisms for support? But I know many of our listeners who maybe are working for smaller companies are thinking, well, how could we, oh my gosh, like how can we pay for that? Or how can we sustain that? And it goes to just being an organization that cares about your employees, thinking about flexibility, thinking about normalizing the fact that, you may have members of your workforce who have caregiving responsibilities, creating awareness and support around that. Of course, we would all love to get more childcare benefits. That would be fantastic. But just having that support more broadly is a great first step. And to Maricella, your point, I think that we did see that more during the pandemic, kids on Zooms and being able to be transparent about, I have to homeschool my kid this morning and then I'll, be catching up later online. But keeping that going is going to be a key aspect to how we, create a workforce that works not just for caregivers, but for all people who have different, responsibilities and identities in the workforce and need to have the space to really show up as they are.
Human-centric, right? Human first.
Human-centric, absolutely. So this week's guest, Lara Hodgson, is a co-author of Level Up alongside Stacey Abrams. Many of us know Stacey. She's been a huge proponent for change, particularly around voting rights. But as we were just talking about childcare and Reshma, and just want to shout out to all of these individuals who are doing so much to change the narrative and the conversation around what's happening in the workplace and in the world. But Lara is the co-author of Level Up alongside Stacey, and Level Up is aimed at helping women, specifically women of color, overcome the systemic challenges associated with launching and scaling a competitive business. Let's get to my conversation with Lara. Hello, Lara. Thank you for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you for having me.
let's get started learning a little bit more about you. Would you mind sharing a story about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I think in short, how I got where I am today is probably the most circuitous route anyone could possibly imagine. I think if I tried to actually create a flow chart or chart it on paper, it would look like someone dropped a bowl of spaghetti. But that's actually why it's been such an incredible journey. Because I think sometimes when your path is too incredibly straight and planned, it means you didn't take advantage of some of the opportunities that presented themselves. And so, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I tell people that I started my very first company when I was in third grade, not because I had any aspirations of being an entrepreneur. Quite frankly, because my friends had started wearing these fashionable hair barrettes that I could not afford. And my mother and I thought, well, we can just make those. And so we started going to the local craft store and getting the components and sort of went from there and designed our own. And before long, everyone liked ours better and started offering to buy them. So every day I would go to school with inventory, and every day I would come home with sales. And about a month or two into doing it, the woman that owned the craft store finally asked us one day, she said, "Why in the world are you here every week buying all of this ribbon and beads? What are you doing with it?" And so we showed her the hair barrettes, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I could sell those for you." And so she started placing orders. And I still remember it was mid-October of my third grade year. And the woman placed a very large order for red and black and then yellow and black barrettes because the Georgia Tech football game was coming up. And this was hundreds of pair. And my mother promptly informed her that the business was closed because I had homework to do. And so I still tease my mother that she actually killed my very first business. From there, I actually pursued engineering because I was always great at math and science. And so I got my undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering. It's great for all the rocket science jokes. And then honestly, I worked in Japan for a while. I kind of went down more of an engineering path before I realized that one of my professors had said that I had an engineering mind and a liberal arts personality. And I remember at the time thinking that that sounded like it required medication, but I later came to appreciate that that was my special skill set, that I had a analytical side of my thinking, but that I was in fact very creative when it came to problem solving. And so I went to business school at Harvard and all of a sudden realized there were jobs I'd never heard of, like investment banking. Because believe me, when you study aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech, investment banking is not on your radar. And so my world was just sort of opened and I started thinking about different things, ended up returning to Atlanta with a high-tech startup and helping that company acquire I think we acquired 46 companies in a few years. It was a roll-up strategy. At that point, I said, look, I love helping acquire companies. I really want to run something. And the CEO did the best thing he could have ever done for me. He told me I was too young. And if you tell me I can't do something, that is for darn sure what I'm going to spend the rest of the day focused on. So I did end up starting the consumer products practice at a company called IXL. Built that from the ground up, scaled it to one of the largest divisions of the company. At that point, one of my clients was Shaquille O'Neal, Mike Piazza, and a number of professional athletes had started a footwear company and had hired us to help build their website. And they ended up recruiting me to come and help run the company, which I did for a few years. And then my mother-in-law started sending me articles on folic acid and all of the things necessary for her to have grandchildren, and pointing out that if I was still commuting around the world, she would never enjoy such a thing as grandchildren. So I ended up coming back to Atlanta and helping another entrepreneur grow his company. I did, in fact, deliver on my mother-in-law's request when we were blessed with our son in 2005. And quite frankly, that's what caused me to be an entrepreneur, because until then, I was really good at helping other people start and grow their companies, and I loved it. But it was becoming a mother that caused me to sort of have a new sense of clarity in my priorities. And I wanted the flexibility to be a great mom. And so that was when I started my very first company with my recent Leadership Atlanta classmate, Stacey Abrams. And from there, we've started 3 businesses, and that's how I ended up where I am today.
I love so much about that story, Lara, and definitely your advice about, taking the risks, seeing the opportunities in unexpected places, and, exploring life and work and passion in so many different ways. It's being open to those opportunities, I think, can be really life-changing for us. And how oftentimes do we, see something come about and kind of shut the door in its face and say, oh, nope, I'm good where I am, or no, that's not something I'd feel comfortable doing. But taking those risks is exciting.
I completely agree with you. And you just described the younger me, because I was not a risk taker. My father is a retired special investigator for the federal government. There is no one in my family that is sort of entrepreneur definition of risk. And so I was actually quite conservative growing up and would never have taken a risk. And I'll tell you, it was actually my academic advisor at Georgia Tech came to me one day with an opportunity. And she said, there is a very unique program that the U.S. Defense Department is sponsoring. And they're going to select 25 engineering students from the United States to study in Japan. You should apply. And I am certain that I gave her a look that was nothing but quizzical. Like, why in the world would I apply for that? Have you not heard the Lara Hodgson plan? It certainly does not involve Japan. And I had never been outside the United States. And I remember she looked at me and she said, Lara, when will you ever get the chance to do something you would never do? And it is rare that I can't make up an answer to a question. But I was speechless. And I thought, that is a really good point. When would I ever get the chance to do something that I would never do? And her point was, as you move forward in life, life gives you responsibilities, and you don't always have the gift of doing the illogical or doing the, something that's just not even logical within sort of your life. And when I was in college, she's like, why not? Why wouldn't you take a chance? What's the worst thing that could happen? You can find yourself in Japan and have a really interesting experience, and that would be it. But it wasn't it, because me being in Japan completely, to say I was outside of my comfort zone wasn't in sight. And I wasn't allowed to speak English. And it was the first time that I was able to look back on my own culture and question things and just ask why we did things certain ways. And it expanded my horizons in really uncomfortable ways.
I personally believe in the power of pushing ourselves to move outside of our comfort zone, to take risks, to experience different things. But it can be really intimidating. And especially when we are living in this time like we are right now, with so much unknown and so many uncertainties, like, what are the ways for you personally and as a business owner that you've approached risk and kind of helped push yourself, over the ledge, if you will, into that great unknown?
Well, I think this is where my engineering mindset is a gift. And Stacey and I always laugh because, I think we have created a very unfortunate urban myth about entrepreneurship, which is that entrepreneurs love risk. And the reason that's unfortunate is that branding, that persona that we celebrate discourages so many would-be amazing entrepreneurs because they don't see themselves in that light. And I certainly would never have seen myself in that light. And I wouldn't even today. And so I think that because I'm an engineer, when I see risk, I am not the type to leap off of a cliff and, sort of design a wing on the way down and hope that there's a soft landing. I have no problem leaping off a cliff, but believe you me, I have studied what's on the ground. I've looked at the airflow. I've decided where the likelihood is of landing, and then I take an educated step. And I think that is a much more common entrepreneurial approach, which is not that you love risk. It's that you're comfortable taking some of the ambiguity that comes with risk and peeling it apart until you can box it in sufficiently. So there's always going to be risk and there's always going to be unknown. But if I can analyze the pieces that I can, at least understand the likely outcomes, then I can take a much more educated step forward and adjust on the way down. So I'm probably still building a little bit of the wing on the way down, but I started out with the drawings and all the parts and it was ready to snap together. So, and especially when we think about women and underrepresented entrepreneurs, when we create that persona of loving risk and throwing caution to the wind, those are the ones that are disproportionately discouraged from entrepreneurship, because in many cases, we have responsibilities and people depending on us that we don't have the luxury of throwing caution to the wind and leaping off a cliff. So I would love to see us change that narrative, because I think there are so many incredible potential entrepreneurs out there that walk away before they even start.
Thank you for that reframing, because I completely agree. I mean, you think about starting your business and all you can envision is risk and failure. But another thing I think is so important about navigating that and reframing that too, as you so accurately and clearly stated, is about that support network you have. And when you have people in your corner and kind of that personal board of advisors, I think it really helps you to feel less like everything is on your shoulders and more that it's, you've got sounding boards, you've got support, you've got cheerleaders that are all there to lift you up and help you, take that risk or do the work. And hearing your story, it sounds like you really have, built a career on relationships and networks and, collaboration.
That's right. And, when Stacey and I started our first business, the way that we boxed in our risk is we actually started a consulting company first. And the consulting work that we did gave us the steady income to allow us the time to envision Nourish and ultimately to envision Now Account and spend the time building that in a way that we weren't stressed in our personal life. And then as those ventures started to show promise and show product market fit, we were able to dial down the consulting piece so that the other could, earn more of our time, grow, et cetera. So there's certainly ways to do that. Your point about the personal board of directors and the network could not be more true. I truly believe that your network is your net worth. But what's interesting is I took a very contrarian approach to what a board of advisors should look like. And it was really a challenge on the traditional definition of mentor. When I started my career, people would often say, do you have a mentor? And there's this image of, finding a slightly more seasoned person that you can go to when things aren't going quite right and you're frustrated and you're down, and they can pat you on the back and they can pick you up and set you back on your feet. And in reality, that's what my mother does for me. Like, I really didn't, that's not what I wanted. But I also realized that there is no one person who you can tether yourself to in this sort of mentor relationship that can answer all of the problems that you're going to face through your career and ultimately, your entrepreneurial journey. And so this idea of a personal board of advisors acknowledged that it's really a collection of people that each bring different perspectives that can help you move forward. But what I tasked them with was actually not building me back up. What I said is, I want you to treat me like a board of directors, meaning I want you more than anything to smack me on the back when I start to believe my own BS and I'm moving in the wrong direction. So it was less about coddling me and sort of telling me it was okay when things were going wrong, because I already have that with my mother. What I really needed was somebody to say, whoa, Lara, you're really going off field here. Your actions are not congruent with what you said your goals were. And so these people that I selected were intentionally not in my industry, not at all related to my venture or my company, but they were people who had known me kind of longitudinally throughout my life, both my professional life and my personal life, that knew who I was and what I stood for and could tell me if something seemed off. And I think you have to have the courage to surround yourself with people that are not going to be your yes people, that are not going to tell you it's going to be okay, but instead are going to tell you sooner rather than later when you seem to be veering off course.
Yeah. We all need that sort of critical voice is the wrong word, because it's not critical. It's just, that person is going to tell you like it is. And we need that. Right. And it's sometimes hard to hear, but it's the best thing to hear to help us stay accountable and continue to move towards our goals. Thinking about you and Stacey and the number of companies you've started together, how did you know that you would work as business partners? And what is the dynamic between the two of you? I know so many of the women I've spoken to are looking to start businesses. They're doing it collaboratively with others. And many times it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's something to consider as you kind of form that type of partnership of what are the dynamics between those leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done it right with Stacey and I've done it wrong with other people. And I think when I look at the distinction between why it has worked so well with Stacey, because we've not only been business partners through a successful business, we've been business partners through multiple businesses, some of which failed. And if you can survive a failure and start something else and still stay partners, it definitely works. I think what was unique about Stacey and I is a couple of things. One, we met in an environment where we could see the way we solved problems and aligned that thinking with our character. Stacey and I are very different in almost every axis. So we are not necessarily aligned politically. We're not aligned in terms of our background. We have very complementary skill sets, but almost no overlap. But what we did discover in sort of through this Leadership Atlanta experience, where we saw each other tackle large societal challenges, is we respected one another's intellect, and we respected more than anything that we each wanted to make a positive impact on the world. We respected that we would always have good intent. And I think if you respect that, what you find is we would very often agree on the outcome that we wanted, but how we would go about getting there is very different. And that's okay. In fact, it's fantastic. The other thing that was key for us is our lives do not overlap tightly. And what I mean by that is we knew each other well enough to trust one another inherently and to respect good intent and respect a value system. But our children don't go to the same school. We don't go to the same church. We don't live in the same neighborhood. We don't frequent the same activities. And the reason that's so important is that we have the time during the week. While, yes, we spend a lot of time together, we also spend a lot of time apart. And I think the apart time is so critical for us to retain the diversity of thinking, because all too often, two people will come together, or three people or four people, and they become the best of friends. And their entire lives, 24 hours a day, are attached to one another. And that wonderful diversity that came together starts to go away, and you start to think alike. And that's actually not a good thing when it comes to driving innovation and solving problems. So I think having that healthy degree of closeness, but degree of separation is critical.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Tell me about your company now. I want to hear more. I mean, I guess company now, right?
I was going to say, every pun intended.
Like, what was the inspiration? What has your experience been like? I would love to dive in more to that.
Sure. Well, our inspiration for now was visceral pain. And I know that sounds fun. Stacey and I, as I mentioned, we initially started a consulting company, and that led to Nourish, which was a patented spill-proof bottled water for children that we designed and patented. And we were selling that product into small retailers and small distributors. We were spending half of our life at trade shows and events where we could promote the product to mothers and children. And we were both incredibly passionate about this idea of bringing a healthy solution to children and their busy families. And as we were growing that, about a year into the business, we got our first big order from Whole Foods. And I still remember the day that we got the call that the order had come in. I rushed to the office. I was giddy with excitement because we had bagged the big deal. We had visions of being on the cover of Fortune and having the next large beverage company. And as we started to look at the order and all the specifics, our excitement quickly deflated as we realized this was the biggest order we'd ever had. So there was a lot of zeros on the end of it. We were shipping pallets and truckloads, not cases anymore. Along with all of those zeros, they wanted net 30 terms, which meant that we were going to have to ship all of that product, send them an invoice, and wait 30 days to get paid. And we kept thinking, well, how's that going to work, right? We have to pay our employees, we have to pay our vendors. And so we went to one of our vendors and said, look, if we have to wait 30 days to get paid, is there any way you could give us 45 days or 60 days? And they should have said no. I mean, we were a startup company with two women with an idea and no balance sheet whatsoever. We had cobbled together this company with some friends and family money, and we had absolutely no resources. They should have said no, but they didn't. They said, sure, we'll give you 45 or 60 days because we believe in you, we believe in the product, and if you're successful, we're successful. And so we walked away from that thinking, how smart are we? We have figured this out. And then the funniest thing happened. The 30th day arrived and a payment did not arrive in the mail. And the 60th day arrived and a payment did not arrive in the mail. And when we called the customer, they said, oh, well, we're still processing it and we've got to confirm this. And the check's in the mail. The check was always in the mail. I don't know why the U.S. Postal Service can't find small business mailboxes, but they couldn't. And so all of a sudden we found ourselves in the painful position of having to go back to our vendors and apologize for paying late, beg for them to make us more product. And at some point, our vendors were small businesses too. They had to say no. And I still remember the day that we had to turn down a big order because our product was flying off the shelves. And nobody starts a company to turn down orders. That's called a hobby, and those don't make money. And I put my head on the steering wheel of my car after I dropped my son at daycare and I cried. And I thought, it's my fault. I must have missed a finance class in business school. How did I not know this was going to happen? I must have negotiated poorly. And after a few minutes of self-pity, I sort of, the other voice in the other side of my head said, this is not the way this company is going down. We are going to get back in there and we're going to fix it. And so I marched off to my supplier. He said, well, Lara, you just have a working capital issue. Everyone has that. You should go down and get a line of credit from your bank or try factoring. And I was like, wait a minute, time out. Go back to the second part of that sentence. What do you mean everybody has this problem? And he said, well, sure, everybody has a working capital issue. And I thought, well, if everybody has the problem, then existing solutions must not be very good. And so Stacey and I sat down at lunch one day and we just started to look at everything that existed. Neither one of us are bankers nor finance experts. But what we recognized is that if you looked at things like loans and factoring and all these financy type things, none of them were designed for small businesses. They were all tools that were quite frankly designed for large enterprises and then miniaturized. And so as we were sitting at lunch, we thought, wait a minute. Restaurants never wait to get paid. Why is that? And the reason is because they get paid with credit cards. And if you swipe your card at Starbucks, they get paid that day. And it's not a loan. It's not factoring. They haven't financed anything. They've simply gotten paid immediately. And for that service, they pay a merchant fee. And so that was our aha moment when we decided to create Now Account, which was the first payment system that allows small businesses to get paid immediately in a way that feels like taking a credit card. even when there is no credit card and their customers want an invoice that they can pay later.
The whole process that you just went through is blowing my mind because, well, no, and I say this honestly because, I've been approached a few times where people are like, why don't you start your own business, right? Why don't you start a company? And I'm always like, well, I don't know what I would do. And you expect that like aha moment to just hit you, and it's like you've got all the answers. But here it's like you saw this instance that was a pain point for you, and you kind of were trying to solve your pain point and having conversations, and it kind of you're digging deeper, and this exercise like tell me more. And if you keep saying tell me more and you keep drilling down to what's at the heart of that issue, and then it's, oh, okay, well, this is something I can get behind. This is something I can be passionate about. This is something I think needs to be solved. And now let's go do it. But that journey is an important one to, I think, share with others, that it's not always this like, aha, light bulb moment, and let's go start a company.
That's right. And I think part of it, and this is actually a gift that women have, part of it is being okay with not being the smartest person in the room and not having the answers. Because the most important part is having the question, having the problem. And so neither Stacey nor I had expertise in the solution, but we had absolute expertise in the problem. And then you can find people to help you put the solution together, but your ego can't get in the way. You have to admit that you're not the smartest person in the room, but you are the person who asks the best questions. And so, as we started through that process, what we also realized is that, when you're younger, people always tell you, do what you're passionate about. And I can remember hearing that when I was in college. And while other people were inspired by it, it frustrated the heck out of me because I didn't know what I was passionate about. Not because I didn't have anything. Oh no, I had way too many things, because I can get passionate about a lot of things. And what I realized is that it's not the what that matters. What you have to be passionate about is not what you're doing, but the so what that you're doing, the impact that you're having. And so what Stacey and I are passionate about is leveling the playing field for small businesses and allowing them to grow fearlessly. What Now account does, you could change tomorrow and it wouldn't bother me. But what you can't change is the fact that every day small business owners call us and say, oh my gosh, I tripled my business because of you. I hired 10 new people because of you. So our passion is really anchored on the solution to the problem and the impact that it has on the community. And then the what follows. And I think if you get that mixed up, sometimes you go astray because you get so in love with your solution and your widget that you stop listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, never stop listening, and go into entrepreneurship as it's going to be a process. You're going to continue to evolve and change, but that's a good thing, right? We have to react to our customers and to the world, and that's something we've learned a lot about these past few years. I know you recently came out with a book, Level Up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So we've written a book called Level Up, and the subtitle is Rise Above the Hidden Forces Holding Your Business Back. And it's interesting because about a year ago, Stacey and I were talking about just our incredible journey that was both exhilarating and painful all at the same time. Obviously, Stacey has, moved on to do incredible things in the political and public service world. But we were just talking about all the lessons that we'd learned. And my gosh, if we'd known then what we know now. And we thought, what if we were to create a book that would help people understand that some of the obstacles that you face are self-inflicted. We all have them. But some of the obstacles that you face are not, they're bigger than you. They're built into the infrastructure. They're systemic. And if you don't know that, then you're apt to just turn away and not continue. And Stacey and I are very passionate about, I think so many people focus on startups and starting your business. I mean, good Lord, there's television shows all over the place, Shark Tank, et cetera. But nobody focuses on the scale ups And if all we do is start businesses, but we don't create the infrastructure for them to scale, then they're never going to reach their potential, and people are not able to create value for the economy and, create generational wealth. And so we really stepped back and said, one of our superpowers is when we are faced with a problem, and maybe it's not a superpower, maybe it's a character affliction, but when we're faced with a problem, we could just solve the problem for ourselves, but we don't. We look at the problem and we say, what really caused that problem? Because there's a bigger underlying issue. And if we can solve that, then not only do we solve our own problem, but we solve it for everybody who comes behind us. And so the purpose of the book is really to share our story, and it is raw. I mean, we share the good, the bad, the ugly. I probably cry more times in that book, just as I, explain the pain that we were going through. But at the same time, give people the permission to pursue an idea or a dream that's not your area of expertise, box that risk in, figure out how to make it happen, and then identify those obstacles so that you can rise above them, either by yourself or more likely band together so that we collectively can change it. So, my dream is that Level Up starts as a book, but it really becomes a movement where we give small businesses a voice that they've never had. Because quite frankly, every program that's ever been designed to quote unquote help small businesses is designed by people who've never been one. And so small businesses end up being talked at, not with. And we want to start the conversation that we talk with small businesses.
It's such an astute observation, and also just that, thinking about that business set of, we like to put labels on things. We're like, either you're a startup or you're a later stage company or you're, large cap, whatever it is, like you're fit into some bucket. But it's true, there's many small and growing companies. And I think particularly those that are bootstrapped and not taking on a lot of outside investments, that the pace of growth is slow but steady. And there's different stages and evolutions. And so being able to provide some context and some acknowledgement for that stage of business, but also that been there, done that, multiple times, level of experience that is really, I'm sharing what I've learned. And this is kind of that sharing economy of, we want to see, all, rising tide lifts all boats. Let's kind of share the good, bad, the ugly, and help us all succeed.
Well, and Kristy, you make such an important point about how a business is funded. It is amazing to me the amount of time, attention, airwaves that we give to this concept of venture-backed companies. And certainly they are exciting, right? I mean, nothing that's not exciting about a unicorn. But at the same time, in doing that, we give really no attention to businesses that don't lend themselves to that type of a funding structure. And, let's be honest, less than 0.5% of businesses ever should or will get venture capital. So the other 99.95% of businesses really are overlooked and underappreciated, and yet are the source of such a great amount of wealth and value in the economy. And Stacey and I faced this when we first started Nourish. Good Lord, we're in Atlanta, Georgia, in the shadows of Coca-Cola, right? Beverage giant. Surely there are some funding sources that can help us get this beverage company stood up. And as we went and talked to all of the different, private equity, venture capital, family offices, et cetera, what we kept finding is you're not high tech. And so they weren't interested. And so when we think about this idea of inclusive entrepreneurship, we have to think beyond just inclusive as it relates to gender or race. We have to also think about, is the capital that's in the market inclusive of industries and different business sectors that may not lend themselves to venture capital, but it does not mean they can't create the same amount, if not more, value over time for the economy?
Yeah, we need to talk more about that. It's an important way to, I think, shift the narrative. away from maybe that media-driven kind of unicorn perception, which is like this whole conversation has really been about, taking the risks or I'll reframe that, removing the idea of risk. When we start a company, what are the resources we have to tap into? We don't all have to be unicorns. It doesn't always have to be like multiple X growth night overnight. And we hope that that's what you find and you accomplish. But like, let's talk about the reality of why we start businesses, how you get to that idea, how you approach it, the types of teams you build and support you have, and then, the different decisions you have for growth and funding. And then also, obviously the great work that Now is doing to help with that cap flow and getting everyone in a better place financially.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Lara, for being here today on the Ellevate podcast. I loved this conversation. Lots to unpack here and to share with our community. And we're just grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kristy. I enjoyed it too.
All right, welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Lara. Maricella, we've talked so much about how we support the women in our community who are starting businesses and building and scaling those businesses. And it's exciting to be able to continue that conversation here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be able to have these conversations.
And we do this every week. I mean, not just on the podcast where we're learning from Lara and Stacey and all that they've learned writing that book, but we bring together different career stages within our community through the roundtables. So if you're a rising leader, you want to talk about how empathy and accountability work together, join us at the Rising Leader Roundtable. That's on Thursdays, right, Maricella?
Thursdays at noon Eastern. Every Thursday. I'll be there. Come.
Or you can join us at our Entrepreneur and Business Owner Roundtable. We're going to be talking about your vision for the second half of 2022. It's a great way to get support from others who are going through similar experiences as you or have gone through it before and have some actionable advice for you to take. And at the Women Seeking Confidence Roundtable, we'll talk about overcoming procrastination. That is definitely one that I want to attend because I'm such a big procrastinator. So check out more at ellevatenetwork.com, where you can see all of the roundtables we host on a weekly basis, our holding space roundtables centered around creating safe spaces to talk about identity, intersectionality, and getting the support that you need, as well as some of our local events, which are starting back up in person, where you can tap into a local community of women who are creating change in the workplace, in the world, just like you.
Yeah, go check that out. Come to the roundtables. If you are still up for Zoom, definitely go check your chapter events because we're all coming back slowly but surely, and it's very exciting.
Excellent. And this week's History Makers, we've got some great things to celebrate. You want to kick us off, Maricella?
Katia Echazarreta will become the first Mexican-born woman to travel to space.
Anne Phillips was confirmed to become the first woman to lead the U.S. Maritime Administration.
Katisha Smith became the first female police officer in Hanover Township, New Jersey.
Lisa Holder White will become the first Black woman on the Illinois Supreme Court.
Chelsea Millsap became the first woman to hold the position of sexton for the Old North Church in its 300-year history.
And Darcy Correa became the first woman of color to be crowned Miss Wales. Lots of firsts. Keep them coming. We want to hear about you and what you're celebrating. So feel free to reach out to us on social media at Ellevate Network, #ElevatePod. We would love to hear from you. And next week, we'll be talking with Aisha Hamid, who is the Assistant Vice President and DE&I Manager of Alliant. Alliant is an unbelievable organization who's sponsoring important conversations like we have on the podcast each week. They're also a sponsor for our upcoming Mobilize Women Summit, which we are so excited about. Maricella, can you share a little bit more about Mobilize Women?
Yeah, I can't believe it's coming up. It's I think it'll be in a week from when this airs. So June 8th, we are having our full day 6th annual Mobilize Women Summit. It'll all be virtual. Mobilize Women is a very special time for us, I think. It's when we really get to talk about real hard-hitting issues that we need to address as a society, and particularly what is the role of businesses within that. So we'll be talking about the impacts of changes in the law for gender and minorities, very top of mind currently. We'll be talking about the changing landscape of mental health, how companies can be more supportive to their employees, how companies can be more, we're talking about combating performative allyship, and how companies can be and should be real allies and not just check a box. We'll have great speakers. It's a really good lineup. I'm biased, but it is. And you can register for free by going to ellevatenetwork.com/summit.
Excellent. So we hope to see all of you at Mobilize Women and see you back here next week for my conversation with Aisha.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.